thanks for being patient with a somewhat unusual setup and some adjustments. But for the audience, this means a tête-à-tête with a prominent panel, rather than looking at them from the far. So maybe that's worthwhile waiting. Before I introduce the panel and moderator, I will show a few slides to introduce the topic to you. A topic that is based on our annual report that we published this year, the SME Competitiveness Outlook, focused in 2017 on regional trade. That was a bit a risk because it's a year of a ministerial conference. And the reason why we focused on the region was not so much that we potentially preempted. Okay. Is this not functioning? ¿Qué está pasando? Okay, that we preempted that the negotiations would be difficult, as they seem to be, but that we had noticed that for SMEs, it's typically the neighboring country or a country within your geographical proximity that is the first partner country for your trade. So the region has always been important as a first step to international trade. We think it will become more important in the next future as the policy environment becomes more uncertain. We see that lead firms are focusing more and more on the regions they know, on setups they know, and therefore whether or not your SMEs will be able to export in the future may very much depend on how your region is functioning and whether the region is a door to global trade or whether not. Regional trade is also important for value chains. We often talk about global value chains, but when you look at the data, here we look at trade flows across the globe, and it's trade flows within value chains. And what you see is that most of the value chain trade is actually regional. And regions are not all equally active in regional value chain trade. We see, when you look at this picture, we see a huge hub in Europe, around, above all, Germany, also France. We see a lot of value chain activity in Asia, around Japan, South Korea, very much China. And we see another hub, the United States, and regional trade around the United States. Africa is the only region where an SME is more likely to contribute to a global value chain than to a regional value chain. So the regional value chain trade totally underrepresented in Africa. And also Latin America, the region where we are today, is a region where regional value chain is underrepresented. Now, these pictures, they are used quite a lot by economists. They are nice to see what is happening. They do not really help to understand why this is happening. Now, at ITC, we have developed a concept of measuring competitiveness, SME competitiveness. It's a concept where we look like others at national variables. What are the regulations? What are the tariffs? But we also look at firm-level information and at information in the business environment. And the picture I give you here is a picture where you see the colors reflecting competitiveness based on that approach, and where darker colors mean more competitive countries. And when you look at this, the colorings we see reflect a bit, can give us an interpretation of why we see these different patterns of value chain trade. We see in Europe a lot of dark blue, high levels of competitiveness, deep dark headquarter economies, relatively dark good supplier economies to the headquarter economies. We see also in Asia a number of very dark industrialized headquarter economies, China, very competitive already, the supplier. Same thing North America. Latin America, rather competitive region, but here we have a lag of the headquarter economy, with Chile being the most competitive country, being relatively small, far away from the north. And Africa, very few competitive countries. They are positioned either very much in the north, Tunisia, Morocco, or in the south, with lack of connections between the competitiveness hubs. So we think that this way we assess competitiveness helps to understand why certain regions are better in setting up value chain trade than others. We are also actively working with countries and trying to go deeper in this analysis and understand what can be done at the country level, at that very micro level. We are, for instance, now for the second time working in Ghana, assessing SME competitiveness with a deep analysis in Ghana and trying to help them to strengthen competitiveness. We are active in Gambia, where we very much explicitly look at employment for young people and the competitiveness of SMEs. We are just finished working in Morocco with a particular look at their aircraft industry and competitiveness there. We are working in Kenya, setting up a large data collection exercise with the Chamber of Commerce. Finished working in Indonesia. Last month, published work that we did in Hungary, also working in a small country like St. Lucia, and currently working with the Ministry of Production here in Argentina in trying to help countries to understand where they are standing, where things may be working very well at the national level, in the ecosystem or at the firm level, or where things can be improved. And if you want to understand more about what is happening and what may be happening in your region in the coming years, I invite you to look at this link and at this study and to have a deeper look at these issues. I thank you. And with this, give the floor to the panel sitting around the table. I'm honored to have to welcome here Mr. Mariano, Secretary of Entrepreneurs and Small and Medium Enterprise of the Ministry of Production in Argentina, the ministry we are working with here. With us also Agustin Fernandez Naredo, working for Adequagro. He's a hedging and trading strategist there, so he's the kind of person who decides, if I understand well what you do, whether it's worthwhile to invest somewhere or not. We very much look forward to hearing from you. Eduardo Celino from the Minister of Industry, Foreign Trade and Services in Brazil. Thank you for being with us. And the head of the agency I work for, Arancha González, Executive Director of the International Trade Center. And I very much thank Adrian Fognini, the Managing Director for Ibero-America of Thomson Reuters, to whom I will give the floor now because he will be moderating this panel or this tete-a-tete with you around this, I was told, historical table. We don't see it because it's hidden, but apparently it has played an important role in the history of this building. Thank you, Adrian. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marion, and good afternoon, everybody. It is a real pleasure for me to be here in Buenos Aires and sharing with this wonderful panel the topics that Marion has been stated before. Obviously, to discuss and to exchange ideas how we could help the SMEs to internationalize by using the regions as a platform is exciting. From Thomson Reuters, we have been providing solutions and information for the global trade markets during the last 20 years in the emerging markets. One of the things we allocate and dedicate special attention is to understand how our customers, our clients, understand their pain points, where they have some needs that they cannot solve by themselves, and how we could help them. One of the main feedbacks we are receiving from them is how the highly complex and extremely demanding regulations are affecting their operations and their sectors where they are operating. So moving along our presentation, our session today, I would like to start by asking to each of the panelists to make their opening statement in 5 minutes each of you, and I will ask Mr. Eduardo to initiate this journey. Thank you so much, Eduardo.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Our ministry had to be present at the closure ceremony, so he could not be here now. But it's an honor to be here and to have the opportunity to discuss with you the very important issue for the development of MSMEs. These SMEs play a very important role in Brazil. It represents around 99% of the total of the companies in the country, which it's around 8 million companies. And not including 7 million individual micro entrepreneurs. And also they are responsible for 54% of the formal jobs generated in the country. This dynamism in the domestic market, however, are not reflected in the international operation. They represent only micro and small companies in Brazil represent only 1% of the total exports. If we include medium enterprise, it would reach around 6%, which is a very small amount of the. Of course, this is not a reality only in Brazil, I think, and not also a figure that we can find in developing countries. But we really intend to improve that. And I will talk later about which measures we are developing in this direction. One important thing is that MSMEs are usually family-based owners. So the owner has to perform most of the activities. They are in charge of administrative procedures. They are also in charge of financing, human resources. So that's a characteristic that we must consider when developing public policies for these kind of companies. But while some challenges, some difficulties they face in the international market are common to developing and developed countries, a trade bureaucracy appears to be more present in developing countries. And we have identified this problem as one that poses most of the difficulty the MSME finds when trying to get a presence abroad. Of course, we have, when we talk about Latin American, the cultural and language proximity makes that the most natural destination to start an export process. However, despite we have an integration process, for example, in Mercosur, that we did not succeed in go further than an integration in common tariffs, but it would be strongly necessary to integrate the customs process. We have identified there is a lot of room for improvement in customs process, customs products that will, like in the direction that the European Union, that exists in the European Union. I think the easiness to run operation, cross-border operation, is one of the reasons of a successful integration of the economies. Consequently, the improvement of the GVCs. And we think that if we overcome these barriers, we will certainly have a much more, a bigger participation of MSMEs in this environment.
Thank you so much, Eduardo. Extremely good ideas about how we could make some progress and where are the key topics to cover. Arancha, passing on to you. You want to make some comment, or you prefer to hear first?
I hear first from the
okay.
panel.
Me?
Yes,
of course,
Mariano.
of course. You're the wise person in this room.
Second talk of the day with.
We've just been.
Yes. Well, thank you. Argentina has a population of around 40 million people. 20 million is a working population, but only 6 million registered jobs in the private sector. Almost 5 million non-registered workers. So there we have a challenge. Mainly that is SMEs, and most of the non-registered workers are SMEs. And then we have public employees, the social economy, and unemployment is 1.4, more or less. So we need to create millions of jobs, I would say, if we want to reduce poverty, which is our main goal. It's around 30% poverty, 30, 40 million people. It's a lot. It's complex because we are living moments in the world where jobs are not created by millions because of automatization. That's one problem. And the other problem or challenge is that we need to do that in an inclusive way, or economic development with inclusion, and inclusion but with economic development. Mm-hmm. So we say that for that purpose, the only way is to create jobs in the private sector, because government is not going to create more jobs. In fact, there's a big discussion now about the amount of public employees. The balance is very bad, especially in the states, in the interior of the country. Big companies are not going to create jobs by millions. They are not big creators of jobs. So the only way that we have to reduce poverty and to have much and better jobs is by having more and better SMEs. We are working in both things, more and better, basically. So with the existing SMEs, our main challenge is how we can help them to grow and not just to survive. And for that purpose, we need to work on competitiveness and productivity, which are very low. For the past 30 years, we have been going under and under and lower in all the rankings, in the doing business and everything, and also productivity. In comparison with big companies, productivity of SMEs is very low in Argentina. So we are working on that. Part is responsibility of the government, reducing taxes, improving financing, labor law costs, not the salary, the non-labor costs, which are very expensive, and of course bureaucracy, which is our big battle these days. But then, of course, there's an agenda of working in productivity that depends on each SME. We cannot oblige them to do that, but we can give tools and help them to do that. The challenge there is how you can reach all of SMEs with those tools and basically adoption, which is a challenge in every country. I mean, we talk a lot with the other policymakers, and in many countries they have big and amazing plans of digitalization and other things, and then you ask how many SMEs are you working with, and they say 100, 1,000, comparing with, I don't know, in Argentina, which we don't have much companies, there are 850,000 SMEs, so 10,000 is nothing. But that's the challenge, how to reach and adoption especially. But then, of course, we say that we need more SMEs. We estimate that at least we need 200,000, 300,000 more SMEs. And as we all know, since from 10 companies that are created, only 2 survive, more or less, then we have to create 1 million companies. That's why the challenge is very big, because for the past 5 years, I would say, the net rate creation of jobs is 0 in Argentina. Around 60,000 are created every year, and 60,000 are disappearing or terminated every year. So to be positive plus 300,000 is going to be a long way, but we are optimistic because we are developing different programs all over the country with a couple of laws and programs, and it's starting to happen. But it's a big challenge. And of course, a key element on the growing of the SMEs is exports. A clear consequence of the SMEs not being included in global or regional value chains and not exporting, it's that they don't have big productivity, and if they don't have a big productivity, they can't pay good salaries. They can't have, or it's more complicated for them to have formal registered workers. So that would be a big change in our country, because almost half of the working population is non-registered, with all the consequences of that. So for us, international trade is very important. In Argentina, we used to have 15,000 companies that were exporting out of 150,000. So it was very low. In the past 5 years, that was reduced to 9,000. But in reality, that are frequent exporters is less than half of that. So it's 3,000. So it's nothing. That's why we need to work hardly on that at the national level with different tools. Exporta Simple, which was launched last week by the president, is very, very important. But also we think that if this is not joined by the international rules and international bureaucracy, this is not going to happen. That's why we are part of these groups of the YTO that are pushing for the adoption of or the creation of a specific group. We think that the SMEs need a specific approach. They are very different from big companies, and that's why we're also working with Arancha and the ITC on that sense.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Arancha, now we would like to hear you.
Go ahead.
Agustin,
Okay.
up to you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Let me first start with a brief introduction of our company. Adeco Agro was founded in 2002 with the acquisition of 70,000 hectares in the humid Pampas. Then by 2004, we doubled our output and we decided to expand it regional. And first we started in Uruguay, then we went to Brazil, where we bought a very small mill in Minas Gerais. And then we moved to Mato Grosso do Sul, where we built a very efficient cluster, which is one of the most efficient clusters in Brazil, with 13 million metric tons of crushing capacity, which is equivalent to almost 1 million tons of sugar. And just to give you an idea, the cluster is in Ivinima, and a very big percentage of the population of Ivinima depends directly and indirectly of our company. And at that stage, Adeco Agro became a leader agro-industrial company with operations in Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay, with a market cap of $1 billion. And we are now a public company at the New York Stock Exchange. And the main of our company is to produce food and renewable energy with a sustainable model, and our focus is profitability. For this, we run our business driven by strategy of being the low-cost producer of each product. And the perfect example of that is the dairy business. We are highly efficient in production of staple for cows in the humid Pampas, which is one of the most efficient region of the world. And there we produce forage and corn silage for our cows. And there we have integrating our business. We have 2 freestyle facilities with a capacity of 7,000 cows. And we have an average milk per day of 36 liters per cow, which is almost double of our average, our Argentinian average producing. And then we are investing $50 million to double our capacity and continue in our line of being the most efficient producer company in Argentina and in South America. And the idea is to duplicate our capacity, as said, by 2022, with 3 stall facilities and producing over 180 million liters per year. And in line with our strategy, this year we completed a construction of biodigester, so we also produce electricity there with a 1.4 million watts capacity. So as an important player, we work with local SMEs along the value chain, from constructors through, as said in the case of Ibiniema, the whole population in a specific place.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
They are a unicorn also.
I was going to say, Agustin is the exception that must confirm Mariano's rule, because otherwise I was getting a bit lost here. Yeah. No, I mean, let me thank you for putting together this session. What we're trying to understand in the session is what makes for a good model recipe to connect more SMEs to international markets. Understanding that participation in international markets starts with the region. It doesn't start with the globe. This is why we call them global value chains, but in reality we should call them regional value chains. Very few people, maybe unicorns, are born global. The rest is regional. And understanding that there is a particular challenge in Latin America, and this particular challenge has been in a way described by Mariano for Argentina, it can be by Eduardo for Brazil, but it can be expandable to other Latin American countries. Essentially very small direct involvement of SMEs in exports. Very few, in reality, multilatinas, so as we have seen from the chart before, so very little internationalization of SMEs either directly or indirectly, which is maybe linked with the fact that SMEs in Latin America the small companies are only 1/3 the productivity of large firms, whereas in Europe is 2/3. So the gap between the small and the large is bigger in Latin America.
Even more.
And so, again, confirming this data, the contribution to GDP of SMEs is around 30% in Latin America, is 60% in OECD countries, and intra-regional trade in Latin America being 20%, lower than in Europe, but also lower than in Asia, so that we take some pointers. So basically I'm describing the charts that we've seen there and connect this with why, which has a lot to do with competitiveness, which in turns affects the competitiveness. So is the cause and the effect. Now, what we have tried to do in our SME competitiveness outlook, which is our annual report zooming in on the competitiveness factors for the internationalization of SMEs, is look at the policy environment, look at trade agreements. And we didn't do it by design, but it has been extremely auspicious that we did this, because there's lots of questions about whether these trade agreements have a value for the competitiveness and the internationalization of SMEs. And our clear answer is that it has. It is very important that we think about how do we design trade agreements to improve the competitiveness of SMEs. There is a direct link, and there is a direct link in 4 different ways. First, what we have found is that the deeper the trade agreement, the more it helps close the competitiveness gap between the large and the small. So the more you add chapters to a trade agreement, the more you close this competitiveness gap, to give you a sense of the closing of the competitiveness gap. For every chapter, every topic, so investment, procurement, dispute settlement, environmental protection. For every chapter, you close the competitiveness gap in a way between the large and the small, in a way that would mean putting your competitiveness gap on par with, say, Latvia, Estonia, or Lithuania, so that we get a sense of the proportions. Now, why this is important? I think this is extremely important for the guys down the road negotiating in WTO disciplines. This is extremely important for the guys negotiating up the road the EU-Mercosur agreement, because the way you frame your trade agreements will have an impact in the ability of creating, in the ability of SMEs of finding a conducive environment to their internationalization. So, deep integration, good for SMEs. Second lesson we have learned. If you put trade and investment under the same roof, meaning in the same agreement, not trade agreement and investment agreement, but trade and investment agreement, it allows your SMEs to do more domestic value added. So there is a direct relationship between putting trade and investment under the same roof and doing more domestic value added. And it's pretty simple. A company sees trade and investment as two sides of the same coin. And it finds it very disparate to have to deal with two different regimes, which may boost exports, but may not necessarily boost the ability to create, move up the value chain domestically. So this is, again, an important lesson for those of you doing trade policy, because there is a direct correlation, and for that we have examined more than 200 trade agreements. There is a direct correlation between trade and investment under one roof and domestic value added. Third, provisions in on gender equality or women and trade, and provisions on SMEs in trade agreements have more than tripled in the last 10, 12 years. So more and more trade negotiators are looking into women and trade, meaning gender, inclusion of women in international trade, and small and medium enterprises. Which is why we have been advocating that the WTO this week considers opening a work program on small and medium enterprises. Because if basically 50–60% of trade agreements are doing that already, it should not be left out of the WTO. Same for gender, which is what has led us to put on the table a declaration on women and trade that has now been supported by more than 120 members of the WTO. It's about coherence between the different policy ingredients in the trade arena. Fourth point and final, there are still other areas that businesses would see in as part of a package that are not being dealt with by trade negotiators: taxation, which investment, trade, and taxation are three, let's say, legs of the same stool, and they are at the moment not being made coherent with trade agreement. Same goes with infrastructure. There is a bit more coherence between investments in infrastructure and trade agreements. This is a bit the Belt and Road initiative that China is pushing, where it's synchronizing its trade and investment patterns and plans with infrastructure investment. So these are some of the lessons we draw from this year's report, hoping that some of the folks that are in Buenos Aires this week would have read, because if they had, maybe today the discussion would be a bit more intelligent.
Good, great. Thank you so much, Arancha. So making just collections of the key ideas and vectors to work on. We were talking about improving or increasing competitiveness, increasing productivity. Obviously, we are looking for reducing poverty, for increasing the job creation power that the SME has there to put on the table. We were talking about the custom process that we need to simplify and to improve the internationalization within the region. The value chain, the deep integration, the investment and trade are the common topics to discuss, to put on the table. So just some figures to share with you, and very related to what you have discussing. Specifically in Latin America, SMEs represent approximately 85% of the total exporting companies. It's pretty similar to what Eduardo was mentioning for Brazil, but contributing less than 15% of the volume exported. When thinking on the developed countries, that percentage, instead of being less than 15%, is above 30, it's 33%. Being conscious about the opportunity we have in our hands to be unlocked, I would like to start asking Eduardo, and tying your opening statement and all the discussion, the topics we were just sharing with the other panelists. What do you think, Eduardo, the kind of solution you are working on for approaching in phases and being more similar to the developed countries rather than the situation we have today? Then there are a lot of things that could be a solution for the key agenda we have in our countries here in Latin America.
Okay, as Arancha said, the taxation is a very important issue. To have a rational tax system is a key element to provide the conditions to SMEs participate in GVCs. As I said, also is the custom clear simplification it's also very important, and we have worked on to manage this problem in Brazil. We have recently launched a new regime which provides simplification for SMEs. Through this regimen, the small company is exempted from pre-register as a foreign trade company. Mm-hmm. I mean, to run import or export operation. It seems a simple thing, but for the very small company, it may become a real problem to have all the documents, to provide all the information that the Federal Revenue Service requests for that. So it was something that simplified a lot the process. And one very important thing, it exempts the SMEs to deal with different foreign trade agents. And for them, it's very difficult to find the time and the conditions to deal with the paperwork. Of course, we have legislation that change every day regarding administrative exchange, currency process, and of course, customs clearance process as well. So we exempt them to deal with they have only one single agent, who is the logistic operator. With this logistic operator, who can be this logistic operator? Can be the postal service in Brazil, the express mail service like UPS, DHL, company like that, and any other logistic operator that has the label of authorized economic operator, which is a recognition from the Federal Revenue Service that this company is reliable enough to exempt the company which they represent, the micro small company. So any bureaucratic charge is over the big company. Is not anymore to the small company. Another thing that we have recently introduced is the digital certificate of origin. We intend to because with the digital certification, we have more streamlined issue of the digital certification, and we have cost reduction, of course, and speed with this. The idea is to eliminate the paper certificate on paper by 2018, next year. Another very important thing that we can use to provide this proximity between companies from both borders. For example, with Argentina, we have already systems that interchange information on customs information. So besides the use to control, we can use this information to have to anticipate customer clearance process, for example, and of course that will not only reduce the cost of the transaction, but also would give an advantage to companies that are in the region, and so that we would allow them to participate on better conditions in the GVCs. I could also, I cannot, it's very important to say the importance of e-commerce in this process. Before the advent of e-commerce, to have a presence abroad, the company would have to invest not only in promotion, participation in trade fairs abroad, they would have also to be present on publications, specific publication that would show. We know that that's not cheap. So now with the internet, we have a more democratic environment, which allowed. But we have also challenges to that. The digitalization of SMEs is something that not spread, especially in developing countries, that also have costs. But I think public policy has a very strong role on provide the condition and accessibility of this very important instrument to micro and small companies. And I think there are some of the ideas and also real products that our government is implementing to provide solutions for MSEs. SMEs.
Great, thank you so much, Eduardo. And I think that part of the solutions you were referring to are tied to the Argentinian agenda, and that we are working together with them, trying to integrate and to make more easy to the flow of goods and services among these two countries are extremely important. So taking that into consideration, and listening to our president, Mr. Macri, at the beginning of the week, when he talked about the importance of the SMEs on the private sector and job creation, and how he's seeing that sector as an engine, a critical engine for producing wealth in our country. Mariano, I would like to ask you, which kind of initiative the Argentinian government is working on to foster the global trade for SMEs?
Well, it's today at the other panel we were talking, it's very clear on the problems that we still have, that the biggest company of Argentina is Mercado Libre, $3 billion valuation company. And it's, I would say that it's almost half, it's like a binational company, because a big part of the company is in Brazil. Mm-hmm. In fact, the biggest campus that they have, it's in Brazil, not in Argentina, Melicidade.
60%, I think.
So that's amazing. That's why we think that integration is possible. That's why we are very excited about the process that we started with Brazil of renewing our boats, I would say, and try to have integration, but not only in a commercial way, but also productive and technological integration. We think that's possible, and it's proven that, because another unicorn of Argentina is Despegar, which is in the world is known as Decolar. It's almost Brazilian, the company. So in the knowledge-based services area, in integration is clear that it's possible. And not in trade between the two countries, but from the two countries to the rest of the region. So that's an amazing example. But it's also an example of everything which is bad. Okay? First, we don't have a non-double taxation agreement with Brazil regarding exports of services. Brazil imports every year $12,000 billion of services. And how much of that is exported from Argentina, the neighbor? 100 million. Nothing. Why? Because we have this problem for years, and nobody cared in the past to solve it. So now we are trying to solve. We have signed the agreement. It's in congresses of both countries to try to solve it. But it's a clear example of a losing opportunity of integration. The other thing is that even Mercado Libre has a presence in all over the region. You cannot trade between the Mercado Libres. So you cannot sell or export from Argentina to Brazil by Mercado Libre. You cannot use that tool for exports, or to Colombia, or to other countries, or Mexico. So that's a clear example of how even we are a big region and we always talk about the 600 million people market and the same language, or at least the same language in a big part of that. Integration and regional commerce is far away from being a reality, or at least a big important part. So we have a lot of things to do there. What I always make the joke is that it's very sad that the name of Mercado Libre is Mercado Libre, because it's not free market at all. Okay? But it's okay. So we have started this process of with Brazil, also based on the experience and the good experience that we are having with Brazil. Then the rest of the countries of Mercosur have joined, and we are talking about SMEs and trying to include a chapter of SMEs there and the working group. And also the possibility of the agreement with the European Union was a trigger of many conversations and looking at inside and seeing what are the many things that we need to improve. So the process is started, but I think we have realized how much time we have lost and how many things we still need to do. Because if we don't take advantage of the region, then the global market is much more difficult. But what we think is that the integration in the region and regional trade should then lead to productive integration and technological integration, and from the region then go to other markets, Mercosur or even more. It's very interesting, the exercise that the Pacific Alliance is doing. So we are having good conversations. And in that sense, we think that entrepreneurs and SMEs are a good vehicle for integration, because in the end, integration is made by people, not by memorandums, okay? So we are very excited about that, but we are very conscious that there is a lot of work to do. That's why it's also very important, this kind of studies and initiatives, because the truth is the basis for knowing and realizing what you need to change. But we are optimistic, and it was very powerful to see at the beginning of YTO all the presidents and all of them talking about SMEs and integration. So it's a big first step, but a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Mariano. Very clear, and I think it's a common purpose that we have in the region, and we are hoping to have that movements looking forward the future as soon as we can.
Well, Adecoagro is another binational company.
And moving to the private sector, Agustin, the agribusiness is crucial for we know that the economic development of Argentina, the agribusiness is critical. And we understand that the value chains plays a critical and strategic role on generating competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I would like to ask you, Agustin, how the SMEs of your sector are integrating regionally into the value chain, and which kind of risk and benefits you think are in that integration?
Yes, before going straight to your question, I would like to highlight some words that I heard repeatedly. One is diversification, then productivity, and then integrity. And when you look at Adecco's success, those 3 points were our key drivers to success. And when I'm saying diversification, I'm referring to not only vertical or diversification and integration, not only by product and integration vertical, but also regional integration, direct and indirect. And when I mean indirect integration, what I mean with that is with, like in the case of Ivinema, getting all the population of a region totally involved on the company with a big percentage depending directly and indirectly on the company revenue. Then diversification, not only by product but also by country. And finally, how do I link that to the SMEs? Because SMEs were also a key factor of our success with a big flexibility into the company. And when I'm saying flexibility, it's straight to our constructors and the people that is involved as an external employee. And a specific example is regional economies. And we create value on a regional economy by giving work to specific places into Argentina, not only Buenos Aires. And when you look at the distribution or production of our company and you go straight to Corrientes, we are the biggest rice producers in Argentina, and we go through the land to the retail, creating value change on the whole process. And then you ask me about the quality, the risks, and a specific risk for us is the quality of our production. And what I'm saying quality is, for example, the quality of our corn production, rice production, milk production, etc. And how do we mitigate that? Is closely monitoring our plantings and harvest and giving to our contractors a continuous capacitation and knowledge on the process.
Agustin, thank you so much. It seems that regional integration is at the heart of the strategy of value creation of Adecoagro.
Exactly.
And it seems the company is managing very well. And we have now the final question, and it's going to be for Arancha. And Arancha, based on your experience, why you consider that there are some regions that they have been more successful than others in generating value chain activity? What do you find out? What you can share with us?
I mean, there is a multiplicity of factors that have, in a way, contributed to the development of this value chain. But I mean, this granular regional integration that we heard both Eduardo and Mariano describe are a big part of this. I mean, this economic integration beyond trade. I mean, trade is a good step, but if you look at Europe, if you look at what's happened around the 3 countries of the NAFTA agreement, if you look at what's happened around Southeast Asia, a big part of this has to do with deep integration. It's beyond trade. It has a lot to do with standards. It's a standards that is going to help diffuse technology and innovation. I mean, if Agustin has to have one standard for milk in Brazil and a different standard for milk in Argentina and a different standard for milk in Colombia and a different standard for milk in Chile, his business, the cost of his business are going to exponentially grow. So a big part of this is deep integration. It starts with trade agreements. It moves beyond trade agreements. It's much more granular. The more you go granular, the more you create synergies and you help diffuse value chains and incorporate a smaller into value chains. And then, of course, that creates an ecosystem, but then you have the other layer. So you've got the ecosystem, you've got the layer of institutions that play a very big role in supporting the smaller get to the standards of the highest. And the third layer is the company, is the SME, and investing in quality, investing in skills, investing. But, being an entrepreneur is not, it's not an art. It's also something that you have to cultivate. It's also something that you have to skill. It's also something you have to tool. It's also something you have to oil. So these three dimensions, the ecosystem, the institutions, and the companies, is, in my view, what makes for a good environment in which you are going to see more value chain thrive. Of course, at the end of all of this, there is always a headquarter company or a headquarter economy. And this is also what, in my view, we are lacking in Africa. There is no real headquarter economy. And this is what has been a bit haphazard in Southern America. The headquarter in the Americas being the United States, but that's it's a bit not too conducive for this part of the Americas.
Crystal clear. the concept you said, crystal clear. I think that we all appreciate the power of synthesis you have shared with us. And now we have some time. I think we have like 10 minutes for question from the people here, for the broader audience. So here, okay, we have the first one.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation you've led us through, and how important it is to all of us in this room. I'm with a company called Brambles. We're a supply chain and logistics company with...
Yeah.
I'm with a supply chain and logistics company called Brambles. We have major operations in Argentina and Brazil, and grateful for your hosting our business there. And we operate as an Argentine company in Argentina and a Brazilian company in Brazil. I would add a couple things to your comments about what helps the SMEs. Adoption of standards, interoperability. Yeah. Those are key factors. When you want to provide a product to Costco in the US or elsewhere, you have to have standardized unit load devices, pallets, and things like that. Reusable plastic crates, you may or may not use them, but they have to be standardized in order to have throughput. One of the challenges and I was just in Russia last week working with the government, and then before that, 2 weeks before in India, and was meeting with the Ministry of Productivity a couple days ago here. And we've done an MOU with China and working on some of these issues. Standardization and practices is critical. And getting the tools to the SMEs that they don't have. What's the difference between a German SME and an Argentine SME? The Germans have the tools. They have, and I don't think we want to think about an SME as homogeneous. They are not the same around the world. So in India and China, it takes 4 hours to load a truck. In the US, Australia, UK, it takes 20 minutes. Talk about productivity of your exports. There are barriers in these countries that I've mentioned and many others around throughput, making sure that it's an efficient loading, unloading, tariffs, et cetera, that are counterproductive if you want to make your exports more competitive. That's a level of granularity that is certainly totally understand why we're focusing on WTO. And we're here because we support WTO, and we believe it has to be defended at this time. And we are prepared to do that both in US and other places. But we need to get the tools to the SMEs, wherever they are, LDCs, and so on. And we think that's a critical issue that we'd be happy to work with both governments and the region on that. I would just say that Latin America is ahead of Asia in the sense that you have more of your products being loaded on unit load devices that give you a standardized, more cost-effective way, but it's only about 12%. In China and India, it's 1%. In Europe, US, and so on, it's about 99%. So right away, you have a disadvantage in terms of your movement of goods. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Over there, please introduce yourself. And there's a mic there, over there.
Thank you.
And to whom you want to make the question?
Mine is more of a comment,
okay,
actually.
Good, perfect.
So I'm Judith Fessehaye, ICTSD. I just wanted to offer a perspective on Southern Africa, Southern and Eastern Africa, because I've been working on regional value chain for a few years, just before joining ICTSD. So what's happening there, I think it's that the regional trade data actually offer a very optimistic picture in theory, because you see that actually more of the manufactured goods are going towards the region. But what you find is that actually this does not reflect integrated production structure. So it's not really, there's no trade in intermediate goods. It's mostly the big economies exporting final goods to the rest of the, to the less developed countries in the region. So there is a lot of emphasis now on regional value chain and SMEs also in Southern Africa and in Eastern Africa. And there is also some initial work, looking at the policy implications of what is required. And obviously a lot of it has to do with the domestic policy environment in terms of promoting SMEs. But a lot of it has to do with regional cooperation and regional trade agreements. And I think your analysis is absolutely spot on. Some of it is actually related to implementing current RTAs, especially the removal of NTBs, because as soon as one of the countries in the region becomes competitive, magically you have an NTB propping up. Harmonization of standards, the implementation of some of the regional trade facilitation agreements, especially with bonded warehouses, and issues like that. And then I think a lot of it has to do, also requires that countries go beyond regional trade agreements. Investment in infrastructure, and also trying to incentivize some of the South African OEMs to invest in, value-added activities across the region. And to a certain extent, it's happening because, for example, you have South African supermarkets, a lot of the agro-processing investment in the region, in Zambia, Mozambique, Tanzania, is actually originating from South Africa. But the challenge is really to cooperate, to set up a stronger cooperation mechanism between governments to actually promote value-added investment. And the idea of the SADC industrialization strategy, the ESC's industrialization strategy was actually to do that. And I just want to conclude with some thoughts. I think one of the major stumbling blocks in this era is a lack of trust and a lack of political will. At least, I don't know Latin America, but in Eastern and Southern Africa, I think there's an impression that it's impossible to get into a win-win situation where you can actually cooperate and both the stronger economies and the weaker economies can benefit from this type of cooperation. And that South Africa is a big brother, and this will just result in an export strategy for South African firms.
I was in Estonia 10 days ago. We have the meeting of the steering committee of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. I represent South America, and the Minister of SMEs of South Africa represents Africa. And she was talking of trust, precisely. But two kinds of trust. One is between each country, and the other is between the private sector and the public sector. Because these tools that you mentioned, we can have the tools, but then there is adoption of tools. You can reach the SMEs, but if they don't adopt the tools, then you have the same problem. Okay, so trust is very important.
But a problem with tools.
Yes. Totally.
Thank you so much. We have another colleague here that wants to make a...
Yeah, thank you. Andreas Escher, Bertelsmann Stiftung, which is a German-based think tank and private foundation. Arancha, you just outlined, and very convincing, outlined the factors which distinguish success from failure and what would be necessary. And I'd be interested in better understanding something like a theory of change. So what is the sequencing of inputs, of political action, framing, whatever you call it, so as to produce the change we all want?
I mean, if I look at, let me take it with a concrete example. Let me take a case like Argentina. I mean, a big part of the change comes from the top. When you have someone at the top that says, I want this, my vision is that we have to fix this, then it percolates, it starts to percolate more or less, right? I mean, of course, it depends a bit on the country, it depends on the circumstances, but I mean, to be quite honest with you, when I come here and I hear the message that I hear today, I haven't heard this for as long as I've been dealing with trade, and this has been close to 30 years now. I mean, it starts with a clear vision from the top and a desire not only to do good for itself, but to understand that for you to be good, your region has to be good. You can't be good if your region is crap. And your region cannot be good if you are crap. That's the reality. So if you have these two ingredients, in my view, which is a clear vision from the top for itself, but also an understanding that what we're discussing here, which is intra-regional cooperation, requires a bit of generosity that you cannot win all the time, which is a bit going to our colleague a minute ago. It's now what I see. Maybe I'm marked by my European experience. I've seen this in Europe, where I have seen how the strongest and the biggest understands that it cannot always win, because if it thinks it can always win, then by definition the trust element that you require to do a regional integration doesn't work. Otherwise, is what we just heard, is a system to exploit your neighbors. But so these two ingredients to me are essential ingredients. Then the rest you can, okay, you need tools, you need objectives, you need mechanisms to control that your objectives and your tools are getting to result, but these two essential ingredients have to be there. The rest, you can't substitute political energy by tools and mechanisms. They are at the service of the vision and the courage, not the other way around.
And the world is divided today, in my vision, in the people who understand shared created value and who don't. That is economy, and the world is in that vision.
Yeah. Great. We have time for one additional question, comment. Who will be that person? Oh, we have there. Gracias.
Hi, I'm Cristina. I'm from Ecuador, but I'm living now here in Argentina. I only would like to share some comments. I worked the last years with the government in Ecuador, with the Ministry of Industries. So we saw the same kind of problems with the SMA, and especially with the quality infrastructure, is how to help the small and medium companies to get into the trade, international trade, because they are not able to fulfill the standards and they are not able to fulfill their technical requirements, even for selling inside the domestic markets. So we face several challenges trying to teach the companies how they have to fulfill all these kind of requirements. We see that there are a kind of desire of the companies to wait that the government teach them how to do it. And I saw that another challenge for the government to push the companies that they have to do it for themselves, because as the government, they doesn't have enough resources to teach the companies how to do it. So I saw this very challenging. Sometimes we have to meet with some SMEs because they question the government to put some technical requirements because they can't fulfill it, and they say that they are starting losing markets, and they claim the government to teach them how to do it. So it is very tough. And I think that for our countries, we have to work a lot, as since the private, the civil society, to think about how to help and how to push these small companies to take risk, to start to take more, to learn more about how to do it, and to get into these international markets. I saw a lot of desire from the government. We have in Ecuador, we developed a lot of programs in order to help them to be inside the markets, but sometimes they don't do it. They don't get advantage of all the things that are done. So I think that this is I like this topic. It is very fascinating, but there is a lot of challenges, not only for the government, for civil society to think about what we can do and help them.
we can discuss for a day about that. But yes, how you can reach there with impact, but scale the tools, that's the challenge. One interesting thing is using networks. One network clearly is clusters and big companies, value chains, because usually they pay more attention to these tools and suggestions and standards if a big company is telling them to do that rather than the government. So technology and networks, that's the idea.
I want to give you a very practical example of what we have seen in the International Trade Center work. We know that, and I'm sure Agustin will recognize this immediately, a big part of the challenge for many businesses, especially in agri and agro-food, is standards that are not coming from the public sector, but standards that are produced by the private sector. And what to do about them. Because, I mean, on the private side, it's kind of you can participate in a discussion, you can kind of learn to adjust, but in the private sector, if these are private standards produced by private companies, it's much more complicated. And yet, this is essential if you want to be a supplier to certain value chains, or even if you want to be present in certain markets. So what we have done is tools that will help the company in understanding what they need to do in order to meet those standards, but also tools that would allow the company to self-assess itself. Not call the government to say, help me here, help me there, but rather you self-assess yourself. You responsibilize business in its own drive to internationalization. We have done multiple versions of the same tool, every time upgrading. It's called Sustainability Map. Today, we launched it in Spanish just yesterday here. So I would tell you, go back home and make sure as many companies as possible know of its existence, because it's an extremely useful tool to empower the company to drive its own path to meeting quality standards.
That is very good. One tool that we have developed is a radar of productivity. You can make a self-analysis. We ask you some questions, very basic, and then we give you a quick analysis of the productivity of your company and the benchmark with other companies at the same sector and another sectors, and then that triggers you actions to improve your productivity. So the idea of companies doing their own analysis, it's powerful but to scale.
We in Brazil have adopted a different approach. Our constitution states that the micro and the small business has to have a differential, simplified, and streamlined solutions in every regulation. So we work with the different bodies, whatever the area they are related to, in order to work on modifications of some certain regulations in order to add some specific facilitation to SMEs. So that's why we have created the program that I mentioned, the Exporta Fácil, Simple Export, and we know that we have faced in many situations solutions like why don't you hire a broker? That's a common situation that when you talk with different bodies, but the SMEs cannot bear the costs, or in many occasions they cannot bear the costs of hiring a broker. For example, the small amount of that operation doesn't justify that contraction. So that cannot be a solution. We are working together with different bodies. We have a system that here small companies representations, and then after talking to them, we go to the specific body to talk about a different differential treatment on specific regulations.
Eduardo, thank you so much. And we are on top of the hour. So thank you so much to all of you for participating in this terrific session, and specifically thanks to the panelists for sharing generously your experience, your knowledge, and all the information you have shared with all of us. We are extremely grateful. And again, on behalf of all the audience, I really thanks to you, and I hope you have enjoyed as I did it. Thank you so much, and hope to see you soon.